All right. Hi and welcome. So today we're talking about SOVT exercises and what that means. It's a great place to start for beginners, anyone who's getting used to using their voice. SOVTs are this really, really important principle. It sounds super technical, but it's actually really not that difficult to do once you understand how it all works. Um, and also, for anyone who doesn't do this, if you're a more advanced singer, it's also still really, really important and helpful. And I'll talk about different ways you can integrate SOVT exercises into your practice and into like rehearsals and performance times as well. Like as you're setting up and getting ready for performance, as a singer, we have to be careful about our endurance and make sure that we don't over sing when we're getting ready for performance and things like that. SOVTs are a really great way to do all of that. So please ask questions as we go. This one again is really a fundamental skill, so I'm going to be nice and slow about the process, and I recommend that you try it with me, and I'm happy to give you any tips or any advice if you're struggling with the principle. So what are SOVTs? It sounds like this really fancy terminology, and I think a lot of teachers will use that too, right, to sort of legitimize their practice. But it is actually a really fundamental skill to understand. SOVTs essentially means semi-occluded vocal tract, is what it stands for, and it's different positions that we can get ourselves into as we're singing with the shape of our whole vocal mechanism that help us just ultimately strengthen and stabilize our voice. So it's kind of like a fancy term for consonant shapes, essentially, although it's a little more specific than that. What it really means is when we have the vocal tract partially closed off, it actually helps us utilize our vocal folds in a healthy and efficient way. And the main principle here is back pressure that's created through resonance. So when and I'll go over some different shapes as to, so how we do this and what it feels like. But the main concept is when we block off part of the vocal tract, as opposed, so our most open sort of vocal tract position is like ah, right? The mouth is wide open, tongue is down, ah, everything is open. And shapes that actually close off part of the system are what are going to be our SOVTs. And so that's why they're called semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. Try to say that like 10 times fast, right? But really, again, it sounds really fancy, but it's actually a really specific concept. So we're going to go over a bunch of the different shapes that make this happen. Another analogy, just before we get started, I think this helps people understand how the voice works and why it's so important to do SOVT exercises. So think of it like we have breath pressure underneath our vocal folds, and that's from this low abdominal breathing, right? And engaging our vocal support. And that's really important as we do any of our SOVT exercises. In fact, they're very helpful for getting a better connection to your lower abdominal muscles so that you can get better breath support. So that creates a pressure force underneath our vocal folds. Now, when we use SOVTs, it helps us increase the back pressure, or all the vibrations bouncing around inside our resonator, our vocal tract, right? Our mouth, and this whole sort of area of our pharynx. What that does is it creates pressure on the other side of the vocal folds. And think of it like when these two forces underneath the vocal folds and above the vocal folds are lined up appropriately and have good balance, it creates that flap of our vocal folds. It creates like a push. So imagine like a swing analogy. If we have a really good push, we're going to get oscillation for a while without having to do a lot of leg pumping. And the analogy here for leg pumping is when we have to artificially, for our vocal process, try to keep our vocal folds together. That's squeezing and that's tension, and it fatigues everything, right? With too much friction, too much force on a really small area of our body. So what we think about is actually when we do SOVT exercises, it's helping us get a better push with our resonance and these sort of indirect forces. And then what that does is it keeps our vocal folds moving and more stable the entire time. So It's another analogy I like to use is like if you're familiar with yoga, it's kind of like having a bolster that helps you get into the right position and kind of supports your body as you're getting used to a um, particular posture that you're getting into. Oh yeah, thank you. I was wondering if someone was going to say anything about how I chopped off all my hair, but it's nice for a change of pace. Um, so let's get down to it and start to feel these things out. And I'll talk about sort of some best practices as we're understanding our SOVTs. So again, SOVTs, a fancy term for a lot of our consonant shapes that we can sing into. So there's lots of consonant shapes that are more like that are unvoiced, like p and t, and they're kind of a similar thing, but they're not going to be as helpful for our exercises as we want to do something that we can really vocalize and sustain into. Our basic ones are an M shape. So when my mouth is closed, I'm closing off the vocal tract, right? So an M shape, an N shape, an NG. These are going to be three of the main ones that we like to use. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, okay, I totally get what you're talking about. If you're someone who's not familiar with the specific term, but maybe the sensations, they're all throughout my exercises as a way to gain better connection and balance with your voice. Again, if we're doing a lot to sort of keep our voice and our vocal folds together manually, that's where we get fatigued, right? That's that concept of trying to sing with the throat. And when we do these kinds of things, this area relaxes and our vocal folds are able to vibrate without sort of getting anything in the way, right? Or sort of impeding on that motion. So that's why I start with humming a lot of the time, is to start to feel this. Now, when you're getting good back pressure from an SOVT, you're going to start to hear that resonant sort of like pingy, kind of tinny, buzzing, kind of ringing sound. And that's a sensation of inertance. And then you're going to feel release around your neck. So you can always move your head and your neck as you're doing this. So I'm going to start with the M and the N and the NG and just talk a little bit about the shape. And feel free to try this with me. So with the M, right, our lips are together, but try not to collapse the entire vocal mechanism. So you don't want to be like, that's a little too tight. And it's good to practice actually having a little bit of space in there as well. So a little more hollow like this. And if you know me and my exercises, you can practice sort of moving your tongue and scanning that up and down in the back, and you can start to hear the overtones change. It just helps us understand when we're getting that sort of back pressure and resonance. So you'll hear that sort of like alien-like sound, as a lot of my students will say. I'm going like, right? I'm just moving the tongue up and down, and you're hearing the overtones sort of jump from a really high overtone to a low overtone and back. Now, that one's pretty easy, but another thing you want to pay attention to with any of these SOVTs or any consonant shapes that you're using as you're singing, it's not pressure on those consonants that's creating that back pressure, right? So I don't want to hold or press my lips together really tightly. They're just gently in a position, and that by closing off the space, that's what creates the SOVT effect. And you can't completely forget about your vocal support. So if your belly is caving in as you're doing this and you're just like, and everything's starting to collapse, you're not maintaining that pressure underneath the vocal folds. So that's kind of like a prerequisite, is you have to feel your lower abdominal muscles engaging out and a little bit of resistance of air there as you do this. So that's why I always start with some breathing stuff first, just to feel my lower abdominal muscles, right? Like going like, trying to feel that, my lower belly and back just kind of gently engaging out against my exhale. So as you're doing anything like this, make sure you're not losing your air. In fact, the whole point of SOVT practices it's for singers who, especially if you're beginning and this is a struggle that you're noticing, who have like a really way too breathy tone and you can't really build up power in your voice without strain. It's for singers who feel like they're always singing in their throat and they get really fatigued after just a little bit of singing. And ultimately, it's just really for everybody. So it's just going to create like a lot of endurance. And ultimately, it's kind of how we grow our voice and strengthen it in the right way. So you can try an M, You can also do an N shape. So with the N, one thing you want to be tricky, or one thing that's tricky about this and you want to be careful with is not letting your jaw be engaged. So when we do an N shape, the tip of the tongue just comes up to the hard palate right here. Mm, and I don't want anything to follow here. So just really pay attention to your jaw and make sure that it's just the tongue kind of gently in this position, and the tongue is not pressing either. So you can practice this one for a second. Let's just slide around on it. The cool thing, right, is you can actually move up and down with your pitches as you're doing SOVTs and feel your breath support engage out as you go up and then relax as you come back down. So going like, hi, good evening, welcome. I love that people are coming all at different times of day. And of course, if any of these things are too late, you can always come back and watch the recording of it. So do you feel that as you're doing this, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not pressing really hard with my tongue. I'm not gripping down with my jaw. It's actually pretty flexible, right? I could be like, that's not, the jaw is not what's creating the stability. It's actually just the fact that the tongue is sealed a little bit, and I'm starting to get that nice sort of back pressure and resonance, and that nice ring in the sound. And I'm feeling my belly track out again as I go up, and then it relaxes as I come back down. So that's a really great one to practice. So think of like the M is in the front, right? Like, and then the N is a little bit further back, and you'll often feel the N consonant a little more in the mask, and a little bit more nasal. Although the M is also pretty much in the mask as well. So, and again, make sure you can move your head and your neck freely. So if you're someone who's having trouble like getting up to pitches, and people are saying, oh, your voice is just kind of staying in the same place, this is what you want to start practicing. And we'll talk about like how much you have to do and how often. As long as you're doing it correctly, any little bit of this is going to be helpful on your voice. But generally, for any SOVT practice, they've found with studies that like about 15 minutes of practice a day can actually have a really profound impact on your voice. So you don't have to do like a lot more than that. Just, that as being mindful that there's a lot of things that we want to work on as we're doing SOVTs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that moving forward. But so we've got M, N, and then the last one, it's kind of thinking about these main zones, is the NG sound. Yeah, okay, let's talk about this. So how to position your tongue along with the hard palate and keeping the jaw steady. It does take some practice, and you might need to put your hand here if you're doing it. For some people, that's actually pretty uncomfortable for a second, right? To separate out what the tongue is doing with the jaw, to like that. There are other consonants that form this kind of shape, right? So I talk about like with my sort of consonant zones, tongue to hard palate is like ta, da, la, na, and a rolled ra, right? That's all kind of in that same sort of spot. And it just does take a little bit of practice getting used to. You might find that it's sort of built into your muscle memory to move your jaw a lot. And just doing that's going to help you release some excess tension and make your voice a little more efficient. So you might need to do this and kind of like wiggle your jaw as you're doing it, right? Like, no, 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 no. And you might practice just doing the consonant, kind of going from the consonant to an open space for a second. In fact, a lot of our exercises, right, are doing that eventually. That's kind of how we sing, right, is consonant to vowels. So that might just take a little bit of time to practice. Now, it's not like right behind your teeth. It's often a little bit further back, right, where you start to feel those sort of ridges, right? That's what we mean by the hard palate, the alveolar ridges, and that's going to be where you're going to find those consonants. So the other one is an NG sound, and we'll go over a bunch of these because the important point is you'll find that some of them are going to feel a little more comfortable than others, and that's totally fine, but it tells you something about your technique. And ultimately, getting comfortable with all of the shapes is just going to get you a more well-rounded, efficient technique. This is why like some songs are harder than others for people because of the particular vowel and consonant shapes that we have. Um, yeah, yeah. So there's and you'll see there's some other ones that really frustrate people, but I'm starting with the basic ones. So ma, na, right, m, n, and then ng is really just like a position. Hi, welcome. So yeah, again, feel free to ask questions as we go and try this out with me. We're talking about SOVTs. So any way that we close off our vocal tract as we're singing, and it helps us actually create stability on our vocal folds. So the other one is an NG. So when we go like, it puts us in this particular positions, right? It's more of like, it's a syllable, not a consonant, but I kind of give it a similar position because it really is like a shape that we get into. And the heel of the tongue goes up to our soft palate and seals off there. And same thing with this one, like the N, you want to be careful that your jaw doesn't move up with it. So you can see there's actually a similar pattern here. Whenever we're in an SOVT, you want all the other muscles around it to be relaxed. So it's the only thing that's kind of sealing off the space. And the other things, if they're too engaged, they'll start to block the resonance. So we actually want most things to be pretty relaxed. In fact, as much as possible, even the spot where you're moving into that SOVT, we don't want to press or anchor against it, but just sort of lightly be in that position, sealing off the space. So for an NG, it's like, and a lot of people think of this as the open mouth hum, right? So going like, mm, and again, I remember when I first started doing that, and I was like, that's really uncomfortable. It feels really weird. And you might have these moments where it kind of kicks you off or starts to kind of get a little jittery. And that's totally normal at first. Don't try to press harder into it. It just takes some time for the body to start to find that balance and stability. Yes, when you're doing the NG, the tip of the tongue should just be kind of hanging out by your lower bottom teeth. It doesn't have to be pressing against it. So sometimes people do this other thing where they're trying to create stability, where they like kind of press or anchor the tongue. You want to be really careful about doing that. The front is just kind of hanging out. And it's one thing also that I'm glad you mentioned this, that is a temptation and sort of a bad habit, is when people do the NG, the front of the tongue kind of pulls back, and that can be also too much engagement. So if the middle and the front of the tongue are also kind of thick, it's blocking too much of the resonance as well, rather than allowing everything to sort of freely vibrate together. Right? Remember, a synonym for resonance is synchronized motion. So when we're creating walls for things to bounce around off of, but we want everything to sort of be relatively neutral so that it can all vibrate together and amplify that sound. When things engage, like our jaw and our tongue and these internal muscles that are squeezing, sometimes it's really hard to understand or feel when that's happening, and we'll feel it later. But when that's happening, it's blocking that inertance, so that back pressure resonance. So that's kind of thinking of like when you're trying to muscle it and you're trying to pump your legs, like that swing analogy I was talking about, right? We're trying to get a good quality push with our SOVTs, and then allow that to sort of oscillate without so much extra work. So with the NG, again, tongues like this. Mm, and that's a really great one also for finding good alignment in the back, right? Because we tend to think a lot about the front of our face. And I always say when I'm singing, I kind of want to imagine I have eyes on the back of my head, right? So that I'm not just singing purely from the front. That's when we tend to get in these more collapsed postures, right? Where our head and our neck comes out. So the NG is really great for that. And I like to like swivel around it and go like, and so, we'll go over some ways that we integrate these into some exercises. But right now, I just want you to feel out the shapes. So again, M, N, N, G. So that's kind of like front, slightly front, middle, and then back. And then we get to some of these fricative sounds, which is also a really fun word to say. So we fricative, thinking like friction, and so we've got like a Z or a V or a zh sound. Those are all ways that we can also get an SOVT. So they're also really great exercises, and that sometimes confuses people. They're like, I can actually sing on that consonant, And these ones you definitely can, but you might find that because of the fricative sort of shape, it makes people get a little tight in their jaw. And so it's all the same principles sort of are here, trying to keep the internal space like a little more relaxed and our sort of jaw muscles a little bit drawn. And then I'm going to do a Z shape. So that's like zzz. So with this one, the teeth are kind of close together and the tongue is behind them. Zzz. Think of it like a buzzing bee, right? Zzz. And when people have trouble with this one, it's the kind of same thing with the M. There might be a too collapsed or you might be too far forward. So this is why all these SOVTs help us find stability from different points in the vocal tract. So when you get them all together, they're all kind of like tethering your head and your neck all into sort of the right kind of relaxed middle position. So that's why I recommend trying them all out actually. But of course, ones that feel like you build a lot of tension, you can do less of them in your practice. And after you've done the ones that help you better connect, that feel just a little more automatic. So again, with the Z, and you can hear I'm still actually have that ring in my sound, right? And that's a good sign that I'm just using the inertance rather than trying to squeeze or hold anything. Now you'll see that this one's actually kind of the closest one to any of those hissing exercises I do with that TS sound, right? Going like it's almost like you can think of it as like a voiced version of that breath exercise. Those are great back to back. The other one that's kind of a little harder for some people and you might need to lick your lips is the V sound. So going like because you're using more of your lip and your teeth. So that one's kind of maybe a little less useful in some situations, or at least I find that's the case, right? So everyone has sort of there's variability here in which one kind of is your secret sauce to helping you open up your voice. So there's that, and then this one is actually really tricky. Is the zh or the sound are also things that you could sing as an SOVT. We tend to not sustain them very much in our language, right? But or for some people, yeah, the V sound could be very helpful for head voice. I don't know if I'd necessarily say it's like more or less helpful. Again, it depends on the singer and what your voice type is too. Sometimes they all have a slightly sort of different sort of overtone disbursement, but yeah, I'd actually say a lot of the times exercises that are more back placed, like the are going to be better for head voice as we go kind of further back that way. So yeah, I would say like for me, actually the NG and those kinds of things are going to be maybe a little bit easier, but again, it really just depends. So I would recommend trying them all out and see what happens. So yeah, there's those ones, and then we get to some weirder things, right, that are not really in our language, like a lip trill, and so that's also an SOVT. So that's what people find with lip trills is it's really hard if you're not using your vocal support. It's really hard to get this to happen, and if you have a lot of tension, sort of holding things. So we kind of purse our lips out, and then imagine you're kind of like as you bring them together. It's kind of like blowing air out, that you can get it started that way, but it's really actually just resistance of air as well with our breath pressure. So going like, so I always say there's like lip trill light and lip trill more engaged. Lip trill light kind of sounds like this, going like, you see I'm kind of doing different registration, right? As I'm doing that, it's less, there's actually like sort of less chord compression happening. And then if I'm getting a better seal, I'm actually going to get more of that back pressure. And we'll talk about how we can actually toggle back pressure, and that it's not that just like all on is good or all off is ultimately all off is kind of bad. Ultimately, that's just breath being released, right? Our vocal folds aren't really coming together. But it's always a spectrum. And so you need to find sort of what's suitable for you. Like too much back pressure can sometimes be uncomfortable for people, especially if you're over supporting into it. Then we start to actually, everything starts to kind of squeeze and lock up as well, because the breath will eventually stop. So it's always a balancing act, but this helps us get better connection to these vocal muscles. So lip trills are great, but you don't need to only use lip trills. And this is why I talk about this is SOVTs is the larger category. And so you'll see a lot of videos out and about like, you should do the lip trills. The lip trills are great. And they are, but they're not always immediately accessible, especially to our beginning students. And I'll show you another one, for example, that's not talked about or used as much because it's also can be harder for some people to do, which is the rolled R. But just know that, again, they're just in this list of tools. And just because you can't do lip trills doesn't mean that you can't sing or there's something wrong with your voice. Over time, you'll probably be able to do it better. It just maybe might take a little bit of time. So I don't always do that right off the bat with beginning students because it can maybe disenfranchise you a little bit or just be frustrating. It's like trying to learn to whistle, right? If you're sitting around going like, until you get it, you might be like, I'm wasting my time with this voice teacher. So, these are just sort of things with the trade. So rolling the R is also an SOVT. And I'll talk a little bit if you're not someone who regularly rolls your R's and this feels really foreign, there's ways and tricks to kind of get this to happen. I was actually someone who had trouble kind of rolling my R's for a while until I started to do more practice. So it is possible, especially if it's not in your sort of native language that you're typically rolling your R's. So think of this one as like I talked about, tip of the tongue to hard palate. And you can imagine like you're saying a bunch of rapid Ds at first. So going like, that's actually getting you closer to what happens, but it happens more passively when we're doing with our tongue, when we're doing a real tongue roll. So like, and then you practice that kind of feeling of maybe puffing a little bit of air out through it. That gets you a little bit of that manual feeling, but then ultimately we want this to happen with pressure. So we want our support to drop down. And you might start with the vowel first is kind of helpful for people. So going like, this is really good for tongue tension, by the way, too. We'll talk about it in another live stream, but you can actually do the same thing, right? So it's like a lip trill, but in a different position, right? So like, and you might try different vowels like R, R. I know, isn't that funny? Just knowing these little tricks can be really, really helpful. And that can get your tongue just nice and loose and warm. So R, R, ear, or. So I sometimes try it with different vowels just to get that one going. But you can actually do this with pretty much, like this sort of, you can see it's the same kind of sort of concept as a lip trill, but just in a slightly different position. That actually depends a little bit. Some people have different styles, so you can actually kind of roll it and you can place these all these consonants in slightly different positions. So like, when people talk about like a more dentalized, right? Like da, da, rather than t, 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 right? More puff of air. Sometimes the position of where your tongue is actually can help you with that, right? So you can actually roll it kind of along the whole palate. That's a really weird thing to do. But ultimately, probably somewhere in the middle is probably what I would say, middle front, right on the hard palate kind of area. But play around with it, right? That's the whole cool thing about this is doing this kind of work, getting familiar with the shapes. One, it just helps you isolate your muscles better. So you're not like, what am I doing with my face as I'm singing? Because all these things happen so fast. But it's also actually just training the stability of the voice for the voice to find stability in a healthy way using these forces rather than a more physical way, right? Trying to squeeze things. So you can see this is kind of like the principle with a lot of singing is this concept. Of course, we're always flicking from consonant to vowel. And strangely enough, if you look up like SOVT positions and kind of shapes that are SOVTs, people will also put in the oo vowel. And then I'm thinking, if you're doing the oo vowel, then you probably also should think of the E vowel, like ya, because we're closing off the space a little bit. And then, when we're doing glides, we're going from that smaller space to a bigger space, and we're trying to keep that little bit of a push of inertance active the entire time. So you can think of it more of like a spectrum, right? As our mouth and our vocal tract is more covered, we're going to get more of that amplification. And as it starts to spread out and open out more, it's harder to keep that back pressure. So when we do like exercises where we're doing belting things and other practice, and we're doing like, wah, we're using that wah or yaw. We're using the yaw to get a little bit of a jump start of that push of inertance. So that, and then, I'm using vocal support and all these other things, and it will kind of keep it sustaining for a little bit longer, and doing it with forces outside of just again, the muscles around the larynx trying to hold it together. So, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, like you can also like, for example, I just, as you're mentioning here, like the sort of like gargling kind of a sound. This isn't quite like an SOVT thing, but you might find that if you're getting a lot of tension in these areas because you're pressing into it, use the sort of snore technique to relax the palate a little bit, right? This is just sort of like a little aside tip. I'm going like, that can just help you kind of loosen up this space a little bit. That can be helpful. Again, as people are doing SOVTs, sometimes we tend to want to squeeze or bite down on them, and they need to be just in a loose, relaxed position. And that can also for the muscles in the palate, sometimes trying to like kind of like squeeze it down, but no, no. The cool thing is when we get to these SOVT positions, we can get up to pressure to whatever note we're gonna sing rather quickly. So that's why I'll do these slides like this, like, no, no. And I want people at first to feel that sort of sliding up to pressure, and then you just try to do it faster and faster. So this is like the principle of like SOVT exercises, right? Like, no, no. And then you could practice them detached and be like, no, 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 no. That's helping me maintain all of that resistance, and keeps the vocal folds flapping without me having to work very hard, without any of these signs of working very hard, which are the lifting and straining and engagement here. So again, when you learn SOVTs, it's how you learn how to be like a ventriloquist, right? You're like making the shape without much sort of visible, without much happening in the front, right? Or any sort of obvious cues of you lifting up to the pitch, right? We never want to try to lift or rise up to the pitch, but instead think of sinking down into our lower abdominal muscles, building pressure, and then finding these sweet spots, right? That is what singing is. It's jumping from little balance point to balance point. And when we miss those positions, or there are positions that we're not used to finding stability on, then we start to pump more and we get more fatigued, right? So this is why there's a lot of focus required, actually. But I recommend incorporating consonants and SOVT positions into your practices. So like, for example, like, I'll just kind of pull out some of the exercises I do, and you can see where the SOVT is, right? So if I'm going like, make more magic, I'm using the M's there at each of these moments to make sure and check in with my stability. Like, make more magic. I'm putting in a little bit of time where I'm sustaining onto the vowels, and then catching another SOVT. So in your songs, when you have moments that are tricky, try to find those moments where you can get a little bit of stability. Now, just think about it like back in the day, you'll listen to like people who are like in like these legacies of like vocal studios and things like that, and talking about, oh yeah, this teacher really transformed me. They said like, really make sure you sing into your consonants, right? And that's like before they had the terminology of SOVTs, right? You're using the shapes, but you want to be careful again that you're not just like trying to put a lot of force into them. So when people are like trying to enunciate and things like that, the temptation and the danger is to start attacking and punching and stuff. That's going to be very fatiguing on your voice. That's why beatboxing can be rather tricky too for people. Can kind of fatigue your vocal muscles rather quickly. But instead, think about it as the length of connection to your consonants. So if I'm trying to be understood more, I'm going to take time on each thing, right? And like really make sure I feel the shape out. So that's like this when I'm going like, make more magic, right? So any of these, right? You're going like, na, 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 na. I'm thinking SOVTs in any of these moments where I close off, and it creates this sensation of your voice kind of just like being buoyant and defying gravity, right? It really is like one of the most important principles you can think of. Don't forget about your vocal support has to kind of track with it at the same time. So that's really this idea. There's lots of these, right? Like when I go like, I'm using that SOVT, the NG, for a moment to kind of hang out on that ledge. So I like doing rock climbing. And so it's that concept of where you're not using your arms just always to pull up, but sometimes just allowing the force and angles to just kind of sit for a sec and relax your muscles around it as I move up. So, and then I learned how to support more into my open vowels. So you can throw these into all of your exercises. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about straw phonation because this is one of the big like SOVT things that you'll see all the time, the singer straws. And I want to sort of talk about one, like this is kind of like an interesting little industry. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about this quickly and then I'll get to the straw thing. Is try out some of the other SOVTs. Make sure that you're getting a full seal with your and then you might use like G sounds for a sec, right? So if you're up in your head voice, which I maybe imagine you are, like g g g you want to think of a little more of your vocal support connection. But the whole point of these exercises, it will help you get that less and less breathy, but it's kind of over time. So don't try to like push harder, but just integrate these into your practice more. And the other thing I was going to say is it's a great segue is maybe practice some straw phonation stuff too. The cool thing about straw phonation is you have a lot of options. So I want to talk about this. Like you can get like a set, right? That's nice and convenient. The point is like different sized straws and different length straws. If you're thinking of the opening and the length, they're kind of the two main things. The opening being kind of the most important aspect, are going to change the amount of back pressure. And so not everyone likes the same shape or size. And it might be particularly to voice types and things like that, although I haven't kind of like really fully mapped that out. But everyone, just depending on your vocal technique and style, you're going to maybe favor a different size. And then you want to, just like with everything else, slowly extend to these other sizes so you get used to them. So let's talk about sort of the principles of it. Like I'll often just like grab random little objects that are different kind of straw-like things. So like you don't have to necessarily buy them. Like a little cocktail straws are great for the really thin diameter ones. There's also this trick of putting in multiple straws will change also your back pressure. And we'll talk about the principles here. It's kind of like a funny little science thing. So the shorter the straw is, the less back pressure, and the longer the straw is, the more back pressure you're going to get. The smaller the diameter, the more back pressure you're going to get. And the wider the diameter, the less back pressure you're going to get. And if you add more straws, you're essentially adding more diameter. So if you're like putting, this is funny, right? This is like, welcome to being a singer. Like you're going to sing with like 5 straws in your mouth. But you can actually practice that way rather than even using like different diameters. So just trying to help everyone save a buck a little bit. And maybe, try to save the planet too. Like use reusable straws is probably the best. So, you can even like poke a hole in a paper cup and people will do that kind of a practice, although that's maybe a little bit more rudimentary and not as helpful. We have all these other objects we can use. Um, so if you have like three straws of this, the same shape, as you try all three of them together, and then take one out, and then take one out, or maybe the other way around is probably going to be better for a lot of people. Starting smaller, or having one, and then adding in more and more is a way that we slowly learn how to create stability in any point, right? With any vowel shape. So every vowel shape has a particular position or range that basically gets that back pressure to happen. That's why we call them formants. So it starts to vibrate in a particular pattern. And these are ways to kind of get us to those feelings. So as we go from consonants to vowels, we're sort of passing back and forth. So you think about this is how how the voice works, is how we communicate, how we create stability. We're just learning to do this much more intentionally and strengthening it for singing, which is like a slowed down version of this. I don't know. Explain that to me. So this lax vox method, is that the tube thing? Is that what you're talking about? I need to look it up, but they're all variations of this principle. So that's why I like to talk about like SOVTs as a principle. Yeah. So the tube thing is like the same kind of a thing, right? Like you can get different length. You can change the aperture. So I'm gonna show you a little bit of this with some straw stuff. So like I found this little thing. It's like, I don't know, it was one of like kitchen gadgets thing. And then I sometimes show this one, which is a really long one. So they're gonna have different sensations. I sometimes find that the smaller straws for higher vocalizing maybe more helpful because you're getting those higher formants, smaller space. And then it sort of get maybe a little bit wider as you go lower. We'll follow the natural sort of chord compression that happens with our voice. So you can do sirens on straws. It could just be like, and make sure when you're doing this, just some rules of best practice, that you're not letting air escape on either side. So you can't be like, that's going to be less effective. So think of really getting a good seal. You can even think of a little more like a b kind of a shape, pursing your lips. Yes, it helps with both. That's kind of the cool thing, right? And so a lot of people will also use, like I'll talk about SOVTs a lot with like breath control. Like you can practice blowing bubbles in water. That's a great way to just work on purely your breath. Or you can also just do that like with a small diameter thing and go like, right? That's the same principle as when I go like, we're just using the tool to help us. And it's fun because you can try different tools, different sort of shapes and sizes, and see like what helps you best or which one feels the most comfortable, and then go from there. So it's really I think the thing that's nice about this style is you can customize it, right? And then you can weight train yourself using sort of different size SOVTs. So you can take these, and one thing, for example, is take an exercise. So I'm going to do this one where I go like 2, 5, 1, and I'm going to practice with this, going like. And take it up like that, right? And then one thing you might want to do is try it back to back with just something that's somewhere in the middle, which is, okay, so this is pure SOVT, then something where it goes SOVT to vowel and back and forth, and then something that's just pure vowel is a great sort of way to do this. So I might take something like this again and be like, and then no, 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 and then I might go, whoa, oh. I'm trying to save the same feeling. And we're also just teaching our muscle memory. So know that like sometimes what's hard in this vocal practice is you just need to be present with it, pay attention, have awareness, know what's happening. But you don't necessarily have to do a lot of like extra sort of trying harder. We want to sort of communicate with the body in a different way. So if anything, I'm just like consciously just trying to get loose around whatever's happening with my SOVT shape, right? So that's that main principle here again, is people can do this wrong and actually create some tension too. Ironically, this happens with like every vocal practice, right? So I'm just doing this kind of thing, right? So I'm like, no, no, no. I'm just trying to say, can I maintain that same kind of ring and that same position and feeling? And then maybe we try with different shapes. So maybe with this one, let's do here. It feels a little different. It takes a sec to get used to, okay, how much pressure should I put in? How much force is going to feel like the right balance? And again, it's through just like what feels most effortless and you're still singing the right notes. So making sure my support is tracking with it, right? My belly is popping out a little bit, or just feeling like it's starting to engage a tiny bit as I'm going up and then relaxing as I go down. So you'll see this, right? So some people find that straw phonation kind of gets their jaw tight, just kind of like with the fricatives, right? Going like zzz. So it's not like an end all save all. And this is why I talked about it a little bit later, actually, because some people like really are like, this is the saving grace. It's fixed my voice. It's kind of like one shape, ultimately. And there's all these other ways and different angles that we can get stability from. And so me just being realistic here is like, if this one doesn't feel that great, that is a sign that you have trouble with using your lips without the jaw engaging, right? So working on wah shapes is going to be really helpful. So going like, like maybe wah, 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 just little moments of getting your lips together. And then maybe like, anytime we do stuff like this, it's easy to collapse back here. So you might actually take like an SOVT with the backspace, like, and try to see if you can kind of toggle them a little bit. Feel what it's like to have, that relaxed space, and the thing that people are missing, right, is I'm trying to keep that resonance kind of connected the entire time. That's sort of the main part. Then you might be able to do more of this, right? Like, ooh, ooh. It also might be the diameter, the particular shape of the straw that you're using. So you can do them together, right? I could be like, they all feel a little bit different. Like I like this one for going up higher because it's a little more narrow. So I'd be like doing some register jumping and being like, right? You can kind of see I'm actually doing almost a similar thing, right? Like, and I can feel it kind of moving along my palate, like that C shape. Right? You can see it's all about this force of inertance, right? That's where we get a lot of our power. And most people aren't really thinking about resonance. So even they're like people with this, they're like, just try singing into it for, a few minutes a day. I really like to like know why I'm doing it. Like not everyone does. Some of my students are like, just give me the exercises and that's totally fine. Like, trust me, that's cool. But I think that understanding it helps you create your own exercises. You get a little bit of an inside scoop as to why I'm designing things a certain way. Like if I have an exercise where I'm doing register blending and I'm going right, I'm putting in a little bit of to get some stability, and then I'm going right into that and it's helping me create a little bit of stability through that sort of narrow oo shape. So I'm not over singing, I'm not going too loud, not trying to open up and losing breath pressure. It's going to help me get that really kind of like very strident kind of ringing sound. And again, that's good for vocal health, for extending your range. And then when you learn how to do that, you can start to play around with relaxing some of the breath pressure, finding sort of these in between places, like I think it's easier actually once you learn how to do this and you get your voice strong and resilient enough the right way. So this is the practice. Now, one thing I would say is straw phonation is really great if you're a more advanced singer as a cool down routine or sort of mixed and matched in between your rehearsal practices. So if you're doing lots of repetition to like work on pitch matching and stuff like that, that's where we tend to get a lot of tension actually a lot of times is we're not sure where we're going. And so our focus isn't quite right. And our body kind of does a lot of extra stuff, right? It's like when you're like flailing around to get, the climbing analogy to sort of get up the top and you haven't really planned out your route so much. So what you want to think about is, maybe taking moments to try in your practices to sing a song just with the straw shape, and then also doing this as a way to decompress after you've done like a more heavy practice. If you're working on your belting and things like that, if you're working on any sort of more extended techniques, right, this is going to be really helpful just to start to decompress the voice. And the point being here again is like, you know, practices are this whole cycle and process. So any single practice is not as important as the entire vocal practice and your cycles. So just like as you're exercising, right, you could hit the gym and work really hard and feel terrible, and then it goes away over time. But if you're making it as a part of a routine and you're learning how to relax the muscles and then engage them and relax them, that's how we actually strengthen our voice. So there's going to be a little bit of like fatigue and sort of irritation and things as you're trying to do this. But knowing that is why we want to do these kind of cool down things. So again, like you can do basic slides, you can sit on a pitch. You can even practice, like if you're doing this kind of stuff, if you're focused a lot on the lip thing and that's kind of frustrating you and it's making your jaw tight, focus on just like when I do a hum, like moving the tongue, getting a little bit of that chewing sensation. So it's not just saying static. And you can do that with the strop too. So you'd be like, and this can actually be helpful as you're doing like a song practice, right? So if I'm like, and the other thing, actually, I'm glad I did that as I was doing this. Another thing came to my mind, right? So I'm practicing singing a little bit of Amazing Grace using the straw. Use vibrato. You can actually sing with some vibrato, right? Again, like that kind of freaks people out, but it's kind of good to practice it this way. And this might actually help you with your vibrato too, if you're not used to finding it. So going like, right? So I can practice it like that, and then come back in and be like, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. So you see, I actually kind of jump started my voice, and then it was like all kind of like locked in and tight, right? So in a good way, tight, like as in like feeling really really smooth, and it feels very, very connected. So I'd highly recommend, like in between your practices, take a moment, try your song with an SOVT, whatever thing you're working on. And again, the other one is like for breath control too, right? Because when our vocal folds have better chord compression like that, we're not losing as much air. So this is also the key to sustains. So like one that I like doing is this The Water is Wide, another sort of public domain song, but try it like that, and then be like, the water is wide. So it's more about the efficiency of the breath because of this back pressure. The resonance is holding it in, right? So the main point here is we're not trying to push air out. We're creating resistance of air, and it creates this sort of weird like pressure vacuum system, right? That's how we sing. That's why it feels like it's kind of like inverse from what you'd expect, right? Like when someone's singing well and it like kind of sucks back into the back of their head. I think that's part of like the weird sort of exciting aspect of vocalizing. It feels very kind of sci-fi in a weird way, right? We're utilizing physics and acoustics. And if you're singing into a room, you're getting this other kind of weird sort of uh, connection between like the vibrations bouncing off the walls and back and bouncing internally. And that all you can all kind of vibe off of and synergize off of all of that at the same time. Um, so it's a really, really useful tool. Um, I would say like, yeah, as you're doing all of this kind of stuff, right? Like, practice going back and forth. And you might, as you're doing it, adjust with different straws. You can, again, you can do it without a straw. It can be just like, Um, good, good. I love hearing that, and it's also like, please let me know if you're like I am not following you because sometimes like I get excited and I go really fast, and like also some of these concepts, especially when we get to music theory, can be really tricky. But I'm trying to learn better ways to help people understand this principle because it's really like when you understand the concept, you can do all sorts of exercises this way. So you try with the M, you might try going like and then ma 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 ma, and then so you can see it's already built into the song, right? Amazing grace, how sweet, right? So it's a sensation. It's like think of like when you're skiing and you're carving an edge, and that helps you create some resistance that helps you control your flow. At first, it helps you slow down, right, when you're skiing, and then it actually helps you move faster and gain forward momentum. And this is this process as well with singing. There's a lot of cool analogies like this. Yeah, so that's really the idea. Please like ask some questions. We've got a little bit of time left. Here's another one. Actually, this is kind of funny. I'm seeing this on, I like to, because I'm doing all this all the time, like all my social media stuff, like always floods with like vocal stuff, which is funny. But I'm also curious to see what people are doing that kind of like has like a showy thing. And maybe I'll do this at some point. It's sort of funny. But we're creating this back pressure, which creates resistance of air. And then there's always some air flowing through it. But one sort of visual cue that people will use is the candle thing, right? Well, they'll light a flame. And if you're pushing a lot of air out, you're going to blow that candle out, or it's going to flicker a ton. And if you're doing good inertance and back pressure, it's going to stay more stable. Now, I put that with the caveat again, like it doesn't have to be completely stable because then you might be like holding your breath and it's too much on one side. There still needs to be some air flowing for us to get that resistance. It's like riding a wave, right? We never want to lock up on it, but you can actually practice that. It's sort of silly, right? Because people can see it visually and you're like looking at the candle. The other thing is the focus thing too. There's something to be said about when you're like holding something and like focusing in a certain position and changing your focus because of how our vocal mechanism is so intricately connected to our focus and our visualization and all of these other things, which is really wild because it's a mind-body connection thing. As you learn to scan and change your focus, that actually can also help you gain connection and break certain habits. So again, right, like some people when they're doing stuff, you'll like even SOVT exercises, and this happens to me all the time. Like I'll all of a sudden realize I'm like looking off to a corner or something, or kind of shifting my head a little bit as I sing, and I just catch that. That's part of my practice. And be like, oh, nope, don't need to do that, body. And maybe take a moment and do some SOVT practices, change my orientation, change my focus with my head. You can move your head around. The only thing is try not to go up like this because that tends to be a bad habit and it can lock our throat. just as much as if we try to drop our chin all the way down can lock our throat. So kind of like this sort of range. Think of it like a little bit of like a semicircle is a great sort of thing, and then kind of looking down and over is like one of the best things that you can do. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. And this is really, really important for beginning singers is we do a lot of this kind of work to kind of wire in how the voice works. And then eventually it becomes muscle memory. Just the thing that I'll end with here is like we do this stuff so that the body just learns how to do it in a healthy way without us having to think about it so much because vocal support, a lot of a lot of this stuff, like when we're performing, because we're focusing on so many things, it becomes a little more subconscious or a little more muscle memory and sort of sensation based, right? We can kind of tell when we're like running into danger zone because we'll feel stuff getting kind of tight or like not being as clean, right? We'll kind of hear that we don't have that resonance. So I always say resonance is your guide as a way to know if you're staying sort of balanced and connected and on the voice. And even if you're doing extra cool techniques that change your tone and stuff, you should always be able to pop back into that sort of smooth in the middle singing if you want to do it for a long time. And this is when I'm feeling sick or like things are rough, like I've been over singing, anything like that. Take a break, and then I come back and I do these kinds of exercises, right? Or I'll do them as a cool down. Um, and yeah, so that's the practice. So, you can go through all the shapes. You can integrate it into your exercises, pretty much all the vocal exercises we do, anything for like how to grow your voice, support, resonance, breath control. They're all utilizing SOVTs. What do we sing on? Consonants and vowels, right? So things where we close off the shape a little bit, and then things where it opens and kind of suspends into a certain shape. And we want to find balance between those two things. So there's that. Use it in your practice things. If you're like singing in a choir and it's permissible to do this, like if you're doing lots of repetitions and you're already feeling pretty good, let's say the couple times in, like use the straw for a second. It'll just give you a moment to sort of kind of reset. People go off to the bathroom and do them, or like backstage before performing. That's a great way to warm things up and check in with it without over singing. So yeah, very, very good. Yeah, these basic principles are kind of like the bread and butter, right? That's the most important stuff. And so we'll constantly come back to it because even for me, like I might way over utilize one thing, and then like I'm not, just like we talked about at the beginning of the year, and then I'm like, actually, I just need to get into a nice like solid SOPT practice, or like maybe take a moment and focus more on that. And do a little bit of research. It's fun to kind of see how people explain it and different ways that people will utilize this practice. So you're very welcome, and I look forward to next time. I think we're doing something about like range, finding ranges and understanding ranges, which is really, really important. And again, even for people who think they understand their range, like understanding that it's a little more complex than just where your low and high notes are. So I think that's the next one. And then we're going to do some stuff about vibrato. So we're getting back to some like fundamental roots, which is just like really the answer to getting your voice up and running. These are your daily things that you should be doing. So again, remember, it can be like 15, 20 minutes. Like I've done plenty for today at this point, right? Just by doing this kind of live stream. So yeah, there you go. And, ultimately, like, I think just the last thing I forgot to mention is like if you're having a lot of voice cracking, straw stuff can be really helpful for for like mixed voice singing and stuff. So maybe in the future we'll do a little more particular stuff with that when we cover mixed voice singing. So you're very welcome, and I will catch you all next week. All right, take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day or evening, and I'll see you then.